Welcome to Phenomenal Conversations today with Kathy Allen. The notional title today is something around nature-based leadership. I usually form the final title once I've reflected on the interview. So I'm very glad to have Kathy here today. But before I get Kathy to introduce herself, I'm just going to say a little bit about Phenomenal Conversations. So I interview pioneers like Kathy that are living and embody regenerative change. We try to expand imagination in the midst of the poly crisis. I try to amplify meaningfulness and nuance in an evolving world, and then also try to ask profound questions. And there's two formats. There's this conventional format, one-on-one, but once a month or every 6 weeks, I try to do a live podcast format with people that entering into the conversation and joining in with the change maker, where we do small group breakouts and we have a large group harvest, and we have a kind of collective wisdom stimulated by the lived experience of the change maker. And the next one for that, although this may not be published by then, is on October the 8th, Wednesday in 1900 hours European time. That being said, I don't do biographies, but I do like to get my interviewees to do a little potted introduction to themselves, to share where they're at the moment, and then we'll go into the substance of the interview. So welcome, Kathy. Very glad you could join us, and I'm really excited to what we can share together.
Me too, Dave. I'm really looking forward to it. So I'm a practitioner. I'm a consultant. I've worked in organizations. I work with organizations who are trying to transform themselves into regenerative systems and organizations, or resilient systems. And I use resilient design and regenerative design because their characteristics are so similar, sometimes interchangeably. And I'm also an author. I've written Leading from the Roots, which is, I see it as a roadmap to, if you want to move from traditional organizational thinking and design and leadership to a regenerative organization. It's a roadmap on how to get there from here. And I have a new short ebook out called Following Nature's Lead. But I've been engaged in the using nature as a way of understanding and working in organizations differently for over 20 years, almost 25 years now. And I really have to credit all of my consulting clients who love to experiment and
Good.
think
Yeah.
in different ways, who have helped shape my thinking and my practice in this.
Cool. That's great to hear. And I think you truly are as pioneering as most as most of the people I interview, given you've been in the field for 25 years. So that being said, we've done a little bit of research on your work. And one way you describe nature as model, mentor, and muse. Can you share a moment where you were inspired by nature and experienced yourself as part of nature, a moment that shaped your leadership philosophy?
Mm. Well, I have many stories. And they, as a kid, I spent a lot of time in nature. It was my summer vacations at camp were, some of my best times, climbing trees. So I've always been kind of a person who likes to live and experience nature, but also observe.
Yeah.
And I'm also a gardener. And so, I would have sometimes hands-on experience in the garden. But I found that my mind is quite active, that when I put my hands in the soil, my mind calms down and I can be fully present in the moment.
Right. Right.
And it's a very renewing experience among a constantly dynamic, moving, complex system called nature. I had a recent moment when I was up vacationing on the North Shore of Lake Superior, walking into the rental room condo that I had rented for that visit, and looking out on there was as you enter into the room, there was a full view of the horizon of the lake, which is a huge lake in the US if you're not familiar with it. So you don't see anything on the other side.
Yeah.
And it it just I just connected with this ability to see with no barriers
Mm,
of wide, long distance, and
mm,
discovered again for myself how important it was for me to spend time looking at the horizon and
right.
seeing how it expands your mind, how it lowers your heart rate, how you just feel connected to something bigger. This is my grandfather, who was born and raised in Germany. He believed that you should spend 15 minutes a day looking at the horizon so you don't get caught up so much in the day to day. And but that was a kind of a multiple connection. But it does shape my leadership because I no longer stay just in the near term time frame.
Yeah.
I always look at how my actions will have ripple effects over time and how it will either contribute to future leadership teams' work or how it will constrain future leadership teams' work.
Cool. I once asked Joe Brewer about, what do you do when it's the whole crisis is getting on top of you? And he said a similar thing, just put your hands in the soil. Just put your hands in the soil and, nature will work through you if you make contact. So that's a very interesting correspondence between
Hmm.
his work and yours. And in following nature's lead, if we move on to the second question, you mentioned seven principles like energy, interdependence, and trust. Which principle do you think has transformed your own way of being, not just as a leader, but as a person in relationship to the living world?
I'm going to say, if I can only pick one, that it was interdependence.
Okay, yeah,
When I became, we toss the word around a lot, but when you really deeply understand that you're living in an interdependent world and that your actions will have a ripple effect on others at a distance
yeah,
or nature at a distance, and they will also on you. Something changes in the way you see the world.
mm, mm,
Um, Interdependence then shifts you from thinking that you're living in a system of things to realizing that you're actually living in a system of relationships.
right, yeah,
And as soon as you go there, then connectivity matters
yeah,
and the quality of your connections and relationships matter. And so all of a sudden, the other thing, ripple effect, is that you start looking at the whole instead of the part.
yeah,
And and that has changed everything. And it changes the way I consult. It changes the way I help people see their organizations. It's changed my way from thinking about mission to thinking about purpose, because
yeah,
purpose is a relational conversation as opposed to a statement of who you are as an organization, which is what a
mm,
mission is.
right,
And so interdependence is not something that isn't is top of mind for many.
no,
Um, we have a culturally constructed world that we're living in that is based in a system of things,
yeah,
looking at um, what we do and what we produce as opposed to the quality of our relationships.
yeah,
My work is a lot about transforming organizations, communities, and once you go to interdependence, you realize that all change flows down along lines of relationship at the speed of trust.
yeah, beautiful, yeah,
Energy would be my close second
yeah,
of this because I now use energy as a diagnostic for when I know we're either aligned in a living system or we're not. It's
right,
whether there's positive energy or not in the
right.
room.
Could you say a little bit more about that? So, um, when you're responding to clients and the work that's happening, you're sensing the kind of flows of energy? Do say more
Yes.
about that. Yeah.
Um, well, so nature starts with an energy exchange. Sunlight uh, shines down on the earth, and we're lucky enough to have trees and grass and algae that
Yeah.
can, through photosynthesis, transform that into nutrients that fuel all of life on the earth.
For
So it's
sure. Yeah.
collaborative, relational exchange. Sunlight falls on the moon, but there is no photosynthesis, so there's no energy nutrient capture
Yeah.
there,
Yeah.
right? So I've been asking for a while, partly in writing my book, but partly in experimenting with organizations. What is organizational photosynthesis, and
Okay.
what is that relationship to leadership? And I thought, in terms of energy, was another language to use for photosynthesis. Every individual um, has a free resource inside of them, and which is their own energy that they bring to their work.
Yeah.
And they can choose Monday morning whether they want to bring positive, negative, or neutral energy to the
A
work.
lot do. Yeah.
Yeah, and a lot do. And so, in a leadership framework, there are conditions that enhance positive energy at work. One
Yeah.
of them is connection to a higher purpose.
Yeah.
So you're not just doing work in a rote kind of sleepwalking manner. Another one is the quality and authenticity of your relationships and your connections to each other. And another one is the basic reciprocity that you have with people. You know, if organizations that are tightly hierarchical and like to rank order people or objectify people tend to build out pockets of negative energy or maybe have negative or neutral. They never manifest or access the power of everybody's individual energy that they can bring to work.
Yeah.
So I'm in the business of creating conditions where positive energy shows up. And when your energy dips, you got to pay attention to what's happening in the room
Yeah.
because it matters. And when my own energy dips, I use that as a diagnostic of what's going on here.
Okay. That's great. I love those examples. So if we go on to leadership, using nature and leadership, I mentioned it's having a kind of rebirth or renaissance here in the Netherlands. So I'm curious. Some might work with nature only as a metaphor. So how do you invite leaders to move beyond metaphor into the lived, felt reality of being nature? So it's not just a poetic framing or nice notion, but becomes a transformational experience.
For me, uh, two ways I can answer that question. One is the deeper I understood about the elegance of nature's design,
Yeah,
the deeper my work of using nature as a model and a mentor and a muse
yeah,
became. The when you take and so when you take a principle that's found in nature, like uh, waste is never wasted.
yeah,
It always turns into nutrients for another cycle of life,
yeah,
or uh, it curbs excess from within through feedback. Then you can unpack that design principle and look at your organizational system and say, okay, feedback is necessary to curb being excess.
yeah,
And yet, when I go into organizations, dysfunctional pockets almost always exist. And when you go into those dysfunctional pockets and you observe and notice, what's happening is that the feedback has been shut down.
yeah,
So the leader that might be leading that team or division or organization is somehow unavailable for feedback. or
Mm.
they dismiss it, or they never have time to hear it, or they
Yeah.
hear it but nothing happens to it, and eventually people stop giving it,
Yeah.
and then the dysfunction kind of grows from there.
Yeah.
Whereas in nature, nature is always available for feedback. It
Yeah.
doesn't have the conscious mind to shut down what it wants to hear or not hear. And
Sure.
so there's always a curbing, powerful balancing loop that happens in nature. So if you are using a surface kind of metaphor as opposed to a root metaphor
Yeah.
for bringing nature, I think the anecdote to get you below the surface is by going deeper into the design.
Right.
But in terms of living systems, I began to play with this was another energy experiment that I was having is using quantum mechanics and quantum physics and other there's data beyond just seeing nature as a source
Yeah. Yeah.
tells you that there are different ways of thinking about it. So in our culturally constructed organizations, we think about questions, leadership questions as who's going to do this. But in an interdependent living system, it's what interactions will make this work.
Yeah. Yeah.
We think about how do we control it versus what do we need to unleash? Because the living
Yeah.
system will work with us if we let it. And instead of transforming the individual as the individual is the problem, is our traditional frame,
Yeah.
living systems, field theory, you're trying to influence the field, the
Yeah.
culture,
Yeah.
instead. And so there's some very significant shifts. Instead of, how are you going to how are you going to move a system from being static to
Mm.
transforming itself? A living system is always in movement. So you're really just shifting the and transforming the energy that already exists and
Mm.
building on the movement that already is in the system. So
Yeah.
there's some very deep ways, but conscious ways that you can apply this that
Mm.
moves you to the deeper metaphor or of nature.
Okay, well, that's very interesting because many organizations these days are kind of fixated on measurement, on quantification, even of human activities and metrics. And, it's very positivist in its view of the world, which is rarely questioned. So, how does what organizations are actually able to, what happens when an organization begins to see itself as part of this living interconnected web? What happens to them in that transitory place from, profit, quarterly measurements, monthly targets, all of that kind of objective ways of attending to the organization?
Yeah, so this is a serious limit to to the metric world.
Yeah, yeah.
Because the metrics that we're currently using, we actually developed them, I think, if I wasn't there at the beginning of the use of metrics, whoever was in that room, but they um, they actually couldn't come up with a metric of what they really cared about,
No, no,
right?
exactly. Yeah,
So they created these metrics that are approximations.
yeah,
So I think our quarterly reports were, and profit and loss, for example, or
yeah,
productivity as another example, they were used as a way to say this organization is functional, it's healthy, you should invest in this organization as a shareholder or
yeah,
whatever
yeah,
your
yeah,
selection, right? The problem is that when you use these proxy metrics over time, you stop realizing that the proxy metric um, is just that.
yeah, yeah,
It only measures a part, and you can still be dysfunctional and unhealthy and still have good proxy metrics.
yeah,
And so, and what happens is that a proxy metric over time makes you focus on parts of the organization instead of the whole organization.
Yeah.
Nature is all about the whole. It's
Yeah.
never the parts move and they grow and they die, but they grow and die in part to protect the whole.
Yeah.
So this whole positivistic thing doesn't really work when you're looking at nature-based leadership. So what happens in organizations is they begin to have a deeper, more conscious understanding of what they aspire to be and do,
Right. Right.
and they start looking at it differently. So they might measure not in a quarterly kind of spreadsheet, but they might be paying attention on a daily basis to the quality of their relationships with
Right.
their partners, with their staff, with their the clients maybe that they're working with or customers, with their supply line people, and they begin to create something more like a food web that would be found in nature or a
Yeah.
mycelium um, web that is a fungi off underneath the forest floor that connects and shares information and shares nutrients so the
Yeah.
whole system can work better. When one significant shift, for example, that I did with an organization is they were having problems with this kind of separate measurement that they were doing for different things. So the people who were delivering on programs had certain kind of things they were paying attention to, and the finance people had another one, and the HR people had another set, and um, the leadership team had another set, and they weren't really very appreciative of each other.
No.
The
No.
backroom services were seen as second class, and the folks who were generating the revenue for the organization were kind of rank
The
ordered
top dogs.
top dogs.
Yeah.
And so we were trying to, so I had been working with this organization, and one of the ways that we were bringing this living system nature framework into them was for 2 hours once a month, we would gather and have a conversation. They
Yeah.
would lift up what they were struggling with, and then we would ask provocative questions, kind of like your podcast here,
Yeah. Yeah.
that would say, okay, well, what if we looked at this from a living system framework? What would we
Yeah.
see? What would we see if we saw this from nature's perspective? And we realized that this tension that we were experiencing in the organization, if we saw the organization as a living tree, a
Mm.
huge, beautiful living tree, we would see the connectivity between us
Yeah.
and between the organization and all the other organizations in their ecosystem.
Yeah.
So we put the back room folks in the trunk of the
Yeah.
tree,
Of course. Yeah.
moving the nutrients up and down. We put the program folks and the frontline folks in the canopy, receiving the energy from the sunlight and bringing the nutrients down. We put the leadership team in the root structure because that's another source of nutrients. But then when we presented it to the staff, all of a sudden they saw, oh, we're one. We're not
Yeah.
many.
Yeah.
And and all of a sudden it's amazing how a visual picture like that
Mm.
can change the way you think, because that's really
Mm.
the deeper level, is you have
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
become conscious, noticing, and
Yeah.
you have to change the way you think. And
Yeah.
when you live literally with resilience in mind or
Mm.
regenerativity in mind,
Yeah.
what you believe, how you see the world changes. That's deep. That changes you on a deep level.
Well, that's um kind of helping me reformulate a little bit my next question, which was sort of about the danger of the objectification of nature, which we're doing anyway through extraction, exploitation.
Yeah.
It's a thing, it's an object, it's not us. So, what have you noticed in terms of organizations that adopt your work or really, so try to sincerely work with it? How does that change their kind of moral and ethical perspective on the core nature of the business? ripple effects occur as a result of adopting this more holistic view. I mean, it is a living organism anyway, but
Mhm.
we're trained to see it differently. So, how does that kind of change the way the operational side or the mission of the organizations work? What have you note shifts have you noticed?
Well, I've been working with an organization for 6 years in Africa. It's an international development organization.
Yeah,
They
yeah.
they work in Asia and Central and South America and the US and in Africa. And the senior VP there found me and found my book and uh, hired me as her executive coach to help steward her and her team in Africa towards this regenerative organization. And now, of course, that's caught and spread to the whole
Oh,
international organization. But I'll just use that her example of
yeah,
what's
yeah.
happened in her team. So they're working um, with about they it has fundamentally changed everything. And this person that I've been working with is super. She's really fun to work with because she's super smart and very innovative. But as she has worked with her team, she also has an extraordinary group of people who are in touch somehow in themselves with nature and a living system and the dynamic nature of it. And they have realized that this not only changes the way they work with the people that they're serving in the
Yeah,
international development world, they work with small farm holders and
right.
help them build sustainable farming techniques and sustainable economic frameworks
Yeah,
so they can feed themselves and their families and
yeah.
have a positive impact on their communities. So one of the big shifts was they went from top down, where the experts were coming in to tell you how to
Which
do
is a typical developmental frame for almost
this
all aid organizations, you
pretty
could say.
much.
Yeah,
And they realized that it needed to be locally led because the people
right,
they were working with had contextual knowledge about what worked in their place, which is a
great.
fundamental living system frame and nature frame that context matters.
Yeah,
And so they went from top down to co-created to locally led.
right.
And they had to change their frame, the way they approached, how they built their relationships, how they thought about the work. And
Yeah,
so that was transforming. And then the second step was you couldn't just do it with the people that you were working with. So they're working with 5.25 million farmers in
yeah,
Africa. That if the people that you hire to do that work don't also experience it in the organization,
yeah,
they have this kind of disconnect. So if the
yeah, yeah,
organization maintains its top-down hierarchical frame,
yeah,
but you want them to be co-creating with
yeah.
farmers on the ground,
Which
there's
is
kind of
often a
this,
double message. A lot of creative organizations that are doing more collaborative work,
yes,
often imparting without realizing it.
correct. And so then we started, that was the second phase, which is
Yeah,
we started shifting to a distributed leadership model.
right.
Um, and and but also with a strong kind of emphasis on adaptive capacity and adaptive leadership. Because when you think about building, something so it's strong and sturdy, you often get brittle, which
Right. Yeah,
is
yeah, yeah, yeah.
an organization that can perform under compression strength,
Mm.
but it can't adapt. It doesn't have the tensile strength. And so brittle individuals create brittle organizations, which is the antithesis to resilient or regenerative organizations.
Yeah.
So we also were building, so we were building different capacity, different ways of thinking, different ways of working with their teams,
Mm.
and resilient systems, they have a dynamic to them. And one of the dynamics is that they scale. And
Oh,
so
right.
the way you
Okay.
build integrity in a resilient system is that you have similar patterns at all levels of scale.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
So
yeah.
if you want co-creation in the working with farmers and this locally led um, kind of energy and philosophy and authenticity and reciprocity, notice the energy link back, right? You get
Yeah, yeah,
more
yeah.
positive energy with that
I
framework.
feel positive you just saying those words.
You know, so then you start saying, okay, well, maybe our funders, we should be having this kind of
Yes, yeah,
relationship with our funders and our supply line and um, our government partners and our other kind of collaborators that we're doing. And so we start to build out a whole ecosystem that's built in reciprocity and co-design and co-creation as opposed to a
hmm.
funder coming in and saying, I'm going to give you money, but this is what I expect, you know. So all of those systems have been transformed, and it's stunning. The work they're doing is stunning, and it's powerful, meaningful work.
So at the because one of the thing about the regenerative worlds is the shortage of funding because it's sort of ahead of the curve. And the philanthropic or developmental world has a very conservative cast. So how have they affected the kind of mindsets of those that have the purse strings? What have they done there? I think that'll be interesting for listeners or to the podcast to hear about.
Well, this is interesting because it takes courage and
Yeah,
it takes,
yeah.
a perspective. And before I answer that, let me go back to another thing that happened to this organization when they went there is they they worked on very deep values that they were willing to live, core values they were willing to live. And
Okay, yeah,
one of one of the things that happened is that sometimes you have people that just don't fit your organization and where
yeah,
your
yeah, yeah,
organization wants to go, so they don't like to think in regenerative ways. They're kind of deeply steeped in our culturally constructed ways
yeah,
of leading and working with people. Is and our traditional way when you have a person who doesn't fit is to get them out quickly and at all costs,
yeah, yeah, yeah,
and often create significant pain in the process.
yeah.
So the
For
person is
everybody, even
diminished.
yourself.
The person is
Yeah,
diminished on the way out.
yeah, yeah,
One of their values was to ensure that when people left, they were left whole,
yeah.
so that they could go on to find their another place that was a good fit for who they were and what they were doing. And that just that kind of sincerity and authenticity in the practice of values
Yeah,
gave them courage. I mean, it was something that wasn't about a partnership, but it was something that they could control in the sense that they could choose the values and the way they were working within their organization to the most part. So
sure. Yeah,
when they had funders come, they said they had enough courage or strength to say, this is how we do our work here.
right.
And are you willing to sit at the table and help co-create how this works? And they've had some stunning success with funders
Oh,
that
brilliant.
um, were because they've were having conversation about that. Sometimes there was tension between headquarters that, got to deal with, a business in agriculture and maybe for $5 million. And they said, no, we can't go there because that will weaken our ecosystem and our
Yeah,
locally produced
yeah.
work. And so, you have tensions organizationally
So
sometimes.
that's a kind of moral sensibility in that world where funding is hard to come by, to refuse it from a source that might compromise their, core operations or values on the ground, that's quite
Or
significant
compromise in a regenerative system the long-term
viability. Yeah,
functionality of the
yeah,
system.
yeah,
So if accepting this money actually creates dependency in the future
yeah,
between this funder, and they're looking at as a way of bringing in
yeah,
a business revenue far into the future, but it will basically destroy the local agricultural ecosystem.
yeah, yeah,
So it's not just moral, it's consciousness, it's
yeah,
noticing, and it's looking at things over time
yeah,
against what you're trying to produce, which is a system that is regenerative, that
yeah.
continues to renew and evolve.
I think that circles back to your grandfather's horizon thinking. It has a definite ring about that.
Yeah.
So what's I think that's also what I get from that example is that I've worked in the non-profit sector only in the UK, and you kind of come as a supplicant,
Right.
as a kind of needy, even though you're doing great work, somehow because it doesn't generate income, you're not financially self-sustaining. You come as a
Mhm.
supplicant, but it sounds like they got such value amongst themselves from what they did. They could stand behind that and
Mhm.
not be totally dependent on the donor. That sounds like a kind of no, noble kind of stance they took in that moment.
Yeah, the paradox is that the donors and government and other partners began to see the power of what they were doing. And so, despite the needing to do it with a different set of rules,
Yeah, yeah,
they leaned in and wanted to give more.
right.
So it's like you have to figure out a way to tip that system.
Yeah, yeah.
But I had another example. This was out in California with a community foundation who this particular county in California had four disasters within 3 years.
Oh,
Um,
wow.
Three of them were natural, one was social. It was like two fires, mudslide, and uh, a mass shooting, and that the county had to recover from. And
Jeez, yeah.
so the community foundation was the kind of the lens through which money was redistributed to help respond to each of these series of crises. But something significant happened for the nonprofits in that community. So the funders, so they were usually like what you said, hat in hand, trying to
Mm.
get the funders who had these donor advised funds in this, $500 million revenue source in the community foundation to give them money for their
Yeah, yeah.
nonprofit, right? And so it was always hierarchical, hat in hand. But in response to the disasters, something changed fundamentally in their relationship
Mm.
because the funder said, all we can do is give money, but we don't know how to repair this. We don't know how to rebuild, restore, regenerate our
Mm.
community. But the knowledge and the experience and the relationships that all of these nonprofit organizations and leaders had, they were seen not as the absence of money or the
Yeah,
presence of money,
yeah,
right? They began to see it as a reciprocal
yeah,
relationship,
yeah,
knowledge exchange for resources to help the larger whole of the
yeah,
community
yeah.
move through this. And that fundamentally changed how they thought about each other.
Oh, brilliant. Yeah,
And that's an example of something that shifts from a traditional to a regenerative frame.
yeah, yeah. Sounds great. And did they move forward in a more cooperative, nature-friendly way, or was
Well, I think that they had pleny of practice.
yeah, trial and error?
Four major disasters in 3 years.
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
that sounds
but
pretty
I'm sure that
horrendous.
there was some backsliding at the end of
Yeah,
that. But I
yeah,
think in general that once you've experienced it, it is tough to unknow it.
Yeah.
So there were definitely sustaining pockets for that understanding.
Okay. Got a couple more questions, so I'll just run through the next one, which I've got we've talked about somewhat about your work connects leadership to societal and ecological well-being. What might the future look like if more leaders embraced a living system mindset from the place of being nature, not borrowing or appropriating from nature?
Yeah. Um, this goes to we can choose our worldview. We
Yeah,
can craft our worldview, and there is a regenerative worldview.
yeah,
And if we are stuck in a framework that is more culturally created, like power is the most important thing or one of the most important things,
yeah, yeah,
as opposed to service. So
yeah,
ecology, nature, uh, uh, trees don't eat their own fruit.
yeah,
Water, streams don't drink their own water. They exist to support something else in the ecosystem.
yeah,
And that's that's a mind shift. It's a
yeah,
very significant mind shift. And that and so how we think? Do we think about the ocean? I've been studying the ocean ecology, and underneath this land-based, kind of power silo, um, scarcity, uh, thing focused, short term, control thing, energy.
yeah,
Underneath the ocean, right on the same planet, there's a whole ecology that's built on relationships, cooperation, diversity, generous, uh, regenerative natures, et cetera, cross species partnerships for lifetimes, things like that. And so I think we're one of the things, the other dynamic of resilient systems is that there are thresholds that you cross that help you move to either a more resilient system or a less resilient system.
yeah,
And so our mindsets, if we are interested in helping move towards a threshold where lots the whole would thrive,
yeah,
then we would start with how we think. Do we assume scarcity or can we see abundance?
yeah,
Can we see the abundance in all of its form, not just financial
yeah,
or scarcity of time? Because scarcity has its own neural pathways that it creates. It
for
creates
sure. Yeah,
vision. It creates, kind of an inability to think in more complex ways. Um, so we have to kind of start growing ourselves, becoming more conscious in
yeah,
order to help make this move.
yeah,
But I think we would have a world that looks a lot like an old growth forest or like a mature coral reef or a mature prairie. We would have, um, I love the structure of a prairie where it has these multiple root systems. Some are surface and some are mid-root, and some are deeply rooted plants in the prairie. And when you have a huge deluge of rain, there is no runoff because when the
yeah,
surface roots get saturated, the next root structures draw that moisture down. And when they get saturated, the next one draws down.
yeah,
So all resources that drop on the prairie get used.
yeah, yeah,
And a prairie, they're playing with prairie design and our agriculture in Nebraska and Kansas here, and they can generate as much productivity as a monoculture in
yeah,
terms of
yeah,
food.
yeah,
But again, it's working with nature's design and
yeah,
um, and the principles. So an old growth forest is considered a generous system, and it's also highly diverse because the diversity actually helps tip the system towards these kind of mutualistic exchanges, this
Yeah.
reciprocity. There's always an abundance that one species has that another species needs, and they have an abundance of something that another species needs. And so you recreate these reciprocal relationships that feed everybody. And how can we imagine that, you know?
That's the world I want to step into and help co-create. And that's the
Yeah.
purpose of this podcast, of creating that vision of abundant, thriving nature that is self-sustaining. And
Hmm.
that's what we're here. That's what I see us humans serving. That's
I
our
think
role
some
as
of our,
the river.
yeah,
That's our role.
I think some of our indigenous cultures would be great sources to,
Yeah.
because they're place-based, so they know the limits of
Yeah.
what's around them. They observe, they protect the whole because that also the health of their own community matters to that. And but it's very antithetical to how we've been taught to think. And
Yeah.
uh, this new future is not taught in our graduate schools. It's not taught in our MBAs.
Yeah.
We're still in the old, but stuff that no longer serves us.
For sure. That's for sure. So to finish off, if you could plant one seed of wisdom in today's leaders, a seed that would grow into this lived experience of interdependence, interconnection, what would that seed be?
Um, I have found that once you really see the connectivity and the interdependence of the system, that you don't have to you don't have to there are a lot simpler ways to move a system forward
Yeah.
than we've been using. So
Yeah.
we tend to throw power and resources and control and milestones and objectives to
For
create
sure.
change.
Yeah.
But in an interdependent system, what you really need to do is figure out what is the smallest and simplest thing that I can do
Yeah.
that allows the interdependence of the system to bring the system into health.
Yeah.
So you're working really in a very intentional way with the living system
Yeah.
as opposed to working against it.
Yeah.
So I always think of that the system will help you if you let it.
Yeah.
But it will only help you if it's going, if your direction is going in the direction that the natural living system would want to evolve towards. So I would ask the question, I might seed the question of what's this, instead of asking how much do you need to make this thing happen, I would
Yeah.
ask what's the smallest thing you could do to start the change and let the natural living system of your organization continue it.
That's gorgeous. It reminds me of I've just done the warm data training with Nora Bateson earlier this year, and she talks about the difference that makes the difference. And I
Uh-huh.
think that's really what the essence of what you're pointing to there. What's the smallest thing that we can do? Not, you know, grand 3 year strategy.
Yes,
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah,
And if I were going to do one more, I would
mm,
say we're acknowledge the complexity of your organization, not the complicatedness of it, but the
yeah,
complexity of it, the
yeah,
dynamic, ongoing change. And complex systems need meaning, they need
right.
connection. And
Yeah,
as a simple leadership behavior, if you can be intentional about helping people to make meaning in the complexity of their organization and in society, it's a huge, beautiful thing that we can do.
that's gorgeous. I love those two answers to that question. I'm going to close the interview off now. And thanks so much, Kathy. I've really enjoyed benefiting from your wisdom. And it's inspiring that you're doing this work in contemporary organizations because there's a lot of theory out there. There's not so much ingrained practice. You know, there's a few people doing it, but it's not so widespread. So I think it's great for people to hear about a living example of where this is happening in regular everyday organizations. So thanks so much, and I'm going to shut the recording off now.
All right. Thank you. It was a pleasure to be here.
Thank you.